All right, how's it going, my magnificent sons of bitches? I'm back here again with advice from you. Go ahead and check it out. Link is in the description. His channel's gonna always be in the description in every one of these videos. But last week we decided that we were gonna go ahead and give you a bigger picture. I wanted to go through basically how Satan operates, where Satan begins, and basically how he's kind of manipulated himself, kind of weaseled his way self into every aspect into society as you know it. And this is exactly why society is going to crap. This is why you get so many people so confused. Understand one thing, that Satan is the author of confusion. So if you're confused about something, if you're not sure about something, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be Satan. You know, I know that God's word is kind of hard to understand, and there's a lot of confusion in that. But that's, generally, if you go back into the Bible, you can find answers. But whenever you're talking about like general confusion on society and why stuff doesn't work, like, socialism and stuff like that, generally that's all derived from some form of Satanism at some point in time. So,
Yeah,
Blake, do you want to go ahead and add something before we really get started in here?
yeah, I would like to make a counter to that. I do not think God's word is complicated once you truly build that connection with Him. I think that God gives it to you. Again, you got to build that personal relationship and be able to read between the lines. You have to have discernment and a mind of your own. Very important. But I believe God's word is very simple once you can get to it. However, like you said, Satan, his main objective is cloudiness and confusion. And also, like you said, not Satan attacks your ego, your overinflation of the ego. That's something that we may talk about or may not, depending on if you feel like that it goes upon this topic. Satan attacks your ego, especially if you have an overinflated ego or a hurt ego. So a lot of the confusion 100% comes from Satan or your ego. I do believe God's word is simple. That may just be me, but again, I went on like almost a 5-year journey into madness to get to this point. So
Yeah, yeah. And so when we're talking about Satan, right? And it's weird because like I said, I went through Genesis earlier this week. I think it was Thursday. I think I told you, and then I went through Revelations again, uh, like Thursday. Just for the I was like, man, I'm just gonna go ahead and start reading the Bible again. And then I went through halfway through Exodus, but you know, I got distracted from it, so I didn't go all the way through it. So and this is one thing that I found very interesting. Whenever I started to really look into this stuff and to really deeply study it, is whenever I really started to understand it. You know what I'm saying? You can go to church. You can go to church, you can read the Bible.
correct.
But if you're not understand, you can know the Bible and not understand the Bible.
Absolutely.
And so, like, there are various degrees of people's interpretations of the Bible. And I'm no different. I'm just giving you my perspective of the Bible. So, by all means, don't just take my word for it. Go look in and ask for understanding for yourself.
Yeah,
That's the
same
whole
here
point.
with me. Same here with me. Don't take mine because again, it's something me and Paulson agree on. I believe 100%. You have to have a mind of your own. It is a personal relationship. You you can't take my interpretation of it 100% or his. You can't take Jordan Peterson's 100%. You can't take your preacher or insert whoever your favorite preacher or someone who speaks about this area. You cannot take it because everyone, this is the beautiful thing about the Bible. You can interpret it differently and it speaks to people in different ways.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong. You can understand a part of the Bible that I'm having trouble with. I understand a certain part of the Bible that you may be having trouble with.
Correct.
Yeah, you may be more of an artist and you can see certain beauties that I missed, certain pets. You may be a scientist and you may go through Leviticus or you may go through a lot of these other things and you're going to pick up stuff that I don't really understand. I may be more military minded. I may
Yeah.
understand these battle strategies and how they worked. So that's the whole point. So whenever we're looking at Satan, one of the things that I found very interesting was essentially, right? Satan was cast down here to earth. We know this. Satan's on earth. Uh, but one of the stories in the Bible that I think is pretty much because it seems like the stuff that happens on earth kind of goes parallel with the events that happen in heaven. It's almost like the stuff that happens in heaven was a foreshadowing that happened here on earth. And the stuff that's happening on earth kind of simulates what happened, what's happening in heaven. You know what I'm saying? So when we look at Satan and his effects on earth and where it kind of started, you have to start with the book of Genesis, right? And, Satan was banished from heaven. Well, guess what? Cain was banished from the Garden of Eden. And the reason why Cain was banished was because, of course, he killed his brother Abel. And ultimately, he, instead of, feeling guilt about that, feeling sympathetic, begging to God for mercy, what did Cain do, Blake?
Me and you may have, this is the thing. I'm going to let you go over this, Paulson, because I look at this as more of a psychological point of view on this story. So I want you to give your take, and then I will come behind you and give my take.
Well, what did Cain do? He challenged God. He's like, am I supposed to be my brother's keeper? You know what I'm saying? And it's that arrogance that you just talked about. It's that ego you just talked about. Cain thought that, he took Abel's life and took the place of what God, taken away Abel's life because he felt like that was vindication for God not accepting his, sacrifice. He showed favor to Abel's sacrifice, but he didn't show favor to Cain's sacrifice. And there you go. It's that ego that you're talking about. He felt like he was just as good. He was just as worthy. You know what I'm saying? And whenever, God says to him, if you do not, don't be bitter, don't be jealous, don't be upset. If you didn't show me this, if you showed me the same kind of favor that Abel showed me, taking the best, then, offering it up to the Lord, then you would be favored just as well as Abel was favored. But,
Correct.
there yet again, you're going to see this happen in the Bible quite a bit because Cain was the older brother and Abel was the younger brother. The younger brother showed more favor to his father, and the older brother showed more like, he wanted to take that place. It's just the same thing. It's the same story as Satan. He was going to put his throne right into to the God. He was going to assume the ability of God. And this is really, at the end of the day, this was that mark that God put on Cain, was that Cain was going to, be God. He was going to be ruler of the world, essentially, because we find out in Genesis what happens in Genesis. Cain is banished. He's given this mark on his head because his burden is too much. Whenever we're looking at, the Garden of Eden, paradise at this point in time,
Correct.
it was situated pretty much at the southern end, right outside of Mesopotamia. Whenever we look at civilization, we know that civilization, so we can go ahead and prove this through archaeology. There's probably a lot of legitimacy to this. You know what I'm saying? It's just not a
Correct.
fable. It's not just a myth. This event had to have happened to some degree or another.
Okay.
And whenever we see these cities start to come up, the Bible says, chronologically, that these were the result of Cain getting kicked out. So of course, the earth, he's not able to grow anything. He's not able to really take care of himself. So he has to manipulate people into coming into what we call a society right now, surrounding himself with people, and then building these communities essentially to take care of each other. And we understand that Cain was the first one to start this. And whenever you go back and look at Cain's lineage, you're looking at, high rollers as far as it pertains. Almost every one of the world empires, to some degree or another, can trace their lineage back to Cain. You know what I'm saying? From
Yeah.
Egypt to Babylon to the Persians, that they have some sort of connection to Cain to a degree. So I'll go ahead and let you put your perspective on it.
Okay, so my perspective, again, I don't know if we were on air. I just want to clarify this. There's going to be some things in this video that me and you are going to probably disagree about, and that's completely fine. Like we spoke about last time, our overall message is basically the same. I just think we slightly look at things a little different. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I believe we're going to disagree on 2 or 3 things within this video. And that is a good thing, because maybe you can change my mind. I'm very open-minded. Maybe I can get you to see things a little different. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying here at all. At all. I personally believe the Cain and Abel story is more so of Cain. Okay, so Abel is essentially your fullest potential. What you can be if you're connected, do the things God needs you to do, and do the things that you know are right. And I think Cain is the in this situation. I look at it more from a psychological standpoint. And I think that is basically you killing that idea. Or in this scenario, I believe we all again, like you just said, we can trace it all back to Cain. We're all related to Cain, correct? In some way or the other.
We're probably all related to both Cain and Adam. Well, yeah, Adam. Yeah, we're probably connected, and this will probably get mentioned here in a little while. I'll explain that a little bit more. But
So I'll finish this really quick. What I believe that story tells, and again, this is just my interpretation. I believe that story tells about your ego, the selfishness, the greed, the wanting to be more, and want more than what God has provided you and given you, which is insane because God grants miracles. I've seen it happen. He gives you more than you need. But I believe that is nothing more than your quote unquote ego, overinflation of the ego, to be exact, because we all have an ego that kills that. And I believe it is due to the world that we live in. Back then, same difference. Now, that's just my interpretation. I am not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying I'm right at all, but that's the way I perceive it in that. So it's almost like we have 2 parts in us. I'm not saying we're bipolar. I'm just saying there's that quote unquote angel on your shoulder and quote unquote devil, or whatever you want to say. And I think that is the overinflation of the ego, killing the highest potential of yourself. And that is my opinion. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. That's just my interpretation.
So instead of calling it ego, right? Instead of calling it ego, everybody has an ego. Instead of calling it ego, why don't we sit there and say that the reason and the mark that was left on Cain, because the mark's on the head, why don't we call it arrogance?
Okay, I am fine with that. But let me give you my definition of an overinflation of an ego, because there's a difference in that. We do not want to kill our ego at all. We just want to unite our ego with the highest potential and good of our creator, which is love. And
so by calling it arrogance, right? We're separating it from an ego, because we know that everybody has an ego, and that an ego is not necessarily good or bad. Sometimes it protects you. It's there as a defense mechanism. So the mark wasn't so much of an ego as much as it was arrogance. He was arrogant. he thought that, and see, this is the thing, is that whenever he went out, God took away a lot of his abilities, and he wasn't able to produce grain like he used to, and he wasn't. So you go back and you look at the lineage, whether it be Tubal-Cain, all his kids and all his had special qualities and into themselves. Some of them played the wind instruments. Some of them were good at building metal work. Some of them were good at masonry. These are essentially where you start to get the roots of civilization at, is through Cain.
Okay.
And a lot of it had to do with arrogance. You know what I'm saying? I'll go ahead and let you continue about the ego.
Yeah, because like again, the ego is not bad. I have a definition of an overinflation of an ego. There's an overinflation of an ego, and what is so paradoxical about it is the overinflation is actually deflated as well. It's a paradox within itself. That overinflation of the ego comes from what you just said, arrogance. It comes from greed, selfishness, bitterness, resentment, anger, hatred. And the thing is, it is overinflated, but it's also deflated, and it gets deflated due to those things. So it is a paradox within itself, meaning that people are miserable, they are resentful, they're bitter, and then that leads to selfishness and arrogance, which is an overinflation. So it's almost a very paradoxical thing. And again, like me and Paulson are saying, ego's not bad at all. We just need to get our ego united with our creator and our purpose, and release all the arrogance and resentment and bitterness and selfishness and greed. That's my definition. So go ahead and continue. I just didn't want to lose track of that.
So, okay, from Cain, we get all these civilizations. All of a sudden they're starting to, build these cities and whatnot. That we see in archaeology, a lot of them are of your, they started to build cities, communities and whatnot. And ultimately, they start to get more and more wicked, which is probably going to end up happening. And a result of this is because, for the most part, Cain is very arrogant. At the same time, it says in the Bible that the Son of God saw these women and saw that they were fair and took them as wives. And so here, and I know that a lot of people want to sit there and say, oh no, these were the angels coming down to mate with humans and all this kind of stuff. Whenever I'm looking at this, we understand that you had Adam and Eve, they had another son, Seth, and then you had Cain and his side that was banished from the garden, that was living out, and well, like I said, Mesopotamia, where all these communities were starting to build up. I think what happened was, you had the people in the garden still. We can kind of locate the Garden of Eden. We know it's between the Tigris, Euphrates?
Yeah.
And there's the one that runs through Turkey. I forget the name, what it's called now. But I think it was called the Gishon back then. And then you had the Pishon that run through it, which I just saw a great documentary, where they think that they found it. So we understand that the Garden of Eden was probably very prosperous. It's probably very fertile, probably a very lovely place to live. But there yet again, Cain sinned against God. And then whenever he killed his brother Adam, you had Adam and Eve was still having children and whatnot. So ultimately what I think happened was, those children started to venture out, and they started to settle down with the descendants of Cain. And this is where you get a lot of really, really of the more wicked part of, whenever humanity really started to become wicked. Because you were having the sons of God, right? Which would have probably, Adam was a creation of God. He was the first man, and he was directly created by God. And I think that whenever Adam's descendants started to intermingle with Cain's descendants, this is where you start to really get a lot of wickedness all over the earth. So much so that there's only 8 people that God, decided that he would let live. But the rest of them, he wiped off the face of the earth. So that's how wicked they were back then. And it's, I kind of did some math. I'm thinking that it was probably 4,000 years between Adam and the flood. That's just by what I've gotten, and I could be totally wrong about that. But we know that there was a period there of probably a lot of, kind of like where we're going today, because the Bible says that we're going to, like in the days of Noah, so will it be with the second coming of man. And so we could probably compare a lot of the stuff that was going on back then to the stuff that happens in Vegas, the stuff that happens in LA. You hear all of the wicked stuff going on right now in the media with the sex
Portland. Don't forget Portland, brother. I have a guy that just I'm working with, and he moved from there, and he said it is. Well, everybody already knows what's going on in Portland or Oregon, whatever you want to say here.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. You know what I'm saying? And so, this is what society was becoming after that happened. So God decided, you know what? He found, Noah found favor in his eyes, thank God, because none of us would be here if this wasn't the case. And, for those little atheists that'll say the flood is a myth, right? There are 200 to 500 documents that claim that there is a flood that happened, that rearranged the whole earth. We see the effects of the flood. So if you're going to be one of these atheists and say that the flood story is a myth, first off, you take the measurements, you take the accounting, you go ahead and take in consideration that more than likely Noah would have probably taken the smallest, youngest, most, of the animals to put on there. And you go ahead and do the math and the measurements of that boat. Yes, every animal that was on the earth could have fit on that boat.
Correct, because then you have, because a lot of animals are sea and air.
Yeah.
I had a really good point, Paulson, and about to go on what you were talking about, and it'll come back. Continue. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, brother.
So, these people found favor with God. They end up, sending out, for 40 days, was it, that it rained,
supposedly 40 days, 40 nights, but that could be a lot more.
But like I said, the flood waters was coming out of the earth for 150 days. So, they find dry land, they restart civilization, basically. God makes a covenant, says that I'm never going to end the world again. And even if God did, it would only have to be a couple of generations. So God, puts the rainbow in the air, which a lot of people take advantage of that. And so we have, Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, here's the interesting part. It tells that basically Japheth or Ham looked on his father's nakedness, and ultimately Noah put a curse on Ham, basically cursing his son Canaan. With that being said, I really kind of wonder if maybe, Ham's wife wasn't a Canaanite, because you still had some of these people in society. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But we understand that lineage, that the transgressions against God start all over again, right? After he ends the flood, they start all over again. And that is the line of Ham, And so we'll go ahead and start off right here. And this is where we actually start to chronicle and get a good idea of how Satan operates and how Satan works. It's kind of hard to chronicle something that happened that's already been destroyed. You know what I'm saying?
Correct. I remembered what I was going to say, if you don't mind, and I'm sorry to intrude, but again, I'm afraid I will forget it. I actually am working with an atheist, and me and him were talking today, and I believe I have opened his mind quite a bit. especially when it comes to like what we believe God truly is and Christ truly is. And that's something I'm really proud of. And I didn't even try that hard. We were just talking naturally, and he told me what he was, and I was like, "Hey, man, nothing wrong with that. Not condemning you, but let me just say something." And it only took like a 2 or 3 minute conversation, and then like you could tell he was like you could just tell the wheels started turning, and that's something I'm shit. If I even touch one person and change their mind, brother, it's worth it.
Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, we'll go ahead and get back on to where we're at. So, through Ham, right? You
Correct.
have this guy named Nimrod. Nimrod was the first king of Babylon. And ultimately, Nimrod is the one that, ultimately commissioned the Tower of Babel. He wanted to build a city. So, because God said, be fruitful and multiply and spread throughout the world. You know what I'm saying? He didn't want everybody congregated into one thing, worshiping one deity. That's dangerous. He wanted everybody to develop their own little personalities, to develop their own abilities, to develop their own professionalism. Basically to go ahead and be diverse. That's what God wanted. And we're starting to try and go away from that now. You notice that everybody wants a new world order or one world, and so nothing has changed under the sun. But this was the first. Well, you had the Egyptians and you had the Assyrians, but ultimately it was the Babylonians that would ultimately become known as one of the four major world empires, particularly whenever you're starting to chronicle the Bible. Um, the Israelis came out of Egypt basically, so they've been through every world empire essentially, and that's the one common factor between every world empire. But with that being said, these descendants of Ham, and like I said, you go ahead and look at the descendants of Ham. Egypt is one of the descendants. The descendants of the Assyrian Empire were descended out of Ham, and the Babylonian Empire was descended out of Ham. However, this is where you get your New Age mystery religion. It really didn't start, and this is why this is so important. This is why the Bible specifies on Babylon being Babylon, is because while all these other empires, right, your Egyptians, your Assyrians, they all worshipped polytheism. They all worshipped the sun, moons, and the stars, pretty much. This is where you get a king making himself like a god. This is where man tries to assume the identity of God. Nimrod would name himself the sun god. He would name his concubine wife the moon god, and then ultimately all these gods come from three people. They come from Nimrod, they come from Semiramis, and they come from what people say is an illegitimate kid, but I don't know. But they come from Tammuz. Those are the three gods that essentially form a majority of all religions. It is because after, they were already being worshipped by various aspects of their personality. So you probably had hundreds of gods whenever Babylon was the major epicenter of everything in Mesopotamia. They probably already had hundreds of titles by that point in time. Whenever Nimrod was angry, he would be this guy, would be associated with him. Whenever he was happy, it would be this guy. Whenever he was sad, it would be this guy. And the same thing with Semiramis and the same thing with Tammuz. So every god at that point in time was kind of like an identity of these people. Whenever the Tower of Babel fell, well, what happened? The languages got confused. And so those hundreds of gods became thousands of gods in different tongues and cultures and whatnot. So this was the start of the mystery religions, because what Semiramis knew, who made herself some designation. Okay. What Semiramis understood is that spiritual authority backed temporal authority. They could rule for as long as they want, as long as people thought that they were gods. And so they inverted the story of the Messiah. They basically said that everybody's future and destiny was foretold in the stars, and that it was a story of a great serpent coming back to go ahead and take back his throne, which is basically they revisited the Cain and Abel story, but they spun it around to make Cain the good guy. They try to make it seem like uh, that he was unjustly punished and that he deserved. So you could still see how they're more favorable. The Romans did the same thing. Everything was flipped around. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so they inverted the story that was given, and then they turned it back around to make it seem. And like I said, all goes back to the same thing. What was the first thing that the serpent told Eve? You know, God knows that your eyes are going to be open and you're going to be like God.
Okay. So that is, yeah, we're going to disagree on a couple things, and that's a good thing. But yeah, you're correct on that. So me and you both agree that we are waking up. That possibly society as a whole is waking up. Now, that does not mean that we want to be like God at all. It just means we want to be more connected with God and more, I guess, Christ-like. Is that a good way to put it? Is that a way you would agree to put it, or would you word it a different way?
Well, there's no way that we're going to become Christ-like, and this is one thing that I can't get the
But as close to it as
so
possible. Like that
the
should be our goal, is to
because
be as Christ-like as humanly possible.
okay, here's the deal, right? And
Okay.
I want to make sure I make this clear. The dispensationalists will sit there and say, well, there's no way you could become like Christ. So, while you're sitting there trying to, tell others, because whenever a Christian tries to, present something to you or tries to tell you that that's a sin and that's not good for you, it's just like sitting there. And ends up being a problem with society. Christians are so afraid to sit there and say anything right now because they're going to say, oh, well, who are you to judge me? Here's the deal, right? And I've heard this before that, oh, well, after the New Testament, Jesus came to earth and then, he died for our sins. So, you can go ahead and keep on sinning. You're fucking wrong. All right. The deal is that, yes, none of us can be perfect. There's no way we can meet every qualification. This is exactly why Jesus had to come to die on the cross. However, you do struggle. You do try and do your best to be to try and achieve that. And it's not because I think, okay, you know what, I can be like Jesus. No,
Right.
that's not why you do it at all. The reason why you sit there and you try to make yourself better, you try to become as close to Christ-like as you can, and the reason why is because that's a commitment that you're making. You're trying. It's showing initiative. It's something that you're doing. You're showing obedience to God whenever you try to keep all the commandments that God gives you. God understands that you can't keep these commandments. God understands you're going to come up short, but you still struggle to go ahead and try to keep those commandments, to go ahead and show that you're going to, be somebody that's worthy of, or at least try to work to be worthy. Where none of us will be worthy of, being in heaven, but you're going to try to be worthy. You're going to go ahead and make that commitment that you belong in heaven. There's no way we're going to be like Christ. We're not going to be perfect, but it's just showing obedience to God. That's what it is. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I guess I should clarify that more. Okay, so my main thing here is I think that we should learn to, and you may agree or disagree with this. I think we all should learn to put our differences, petty differences aside. We don't have to agree on everything again. We don't have to believe the same things. We don't have to do anything, but we should learn to love your neighbor like they are yourselves and do unto others. Now, to me, that is that is trying to be Christ-like. Again, we're human. We're never going to be perfect. We're always going to be flawed. We're going to sin. I'm not perfect. I'm far from it. But my main goal is every day to try to do unto others. And that, in my opinion, is trying to be as Christ-like as possible. I'm not saying that anyone will reach that. I'm just saying that's my goal. And that's what I would hope other people would want to reach or strive for at the very least. I'm not, again, probably not ever going to happen. But that is what I try to do personally.
So now you have the leading rulers of the world, the king of Babylon, the queen of Babylon, and ultimately they set themselves up like a religious authority all over the world. You know what I'm saying? Everybody was having to come back and pray to these Babylonian kings. Nebuchadnezzar, he threw in Meshach, Abednego, and you've heard the story before. They were thrown into the fire for not simply worshiping Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the Babylonian king that ultimately found God. So you had already had these pagan gods set up. You had already had the mystery religions, and it was a chain. You know what I'm saying? The priesthood couldn't be obtained. You couldn't, they just didn't make it available to everybody. You had to go to these institutions. What do they call them? Universities. That's what they called them. And so you had to learn this, basically it was Satanism. It was, the worship of, these systems and Cain and a lot of the other stuff, and we could still see this in today's institutions, which I will get to. But, ultimately what ended up happening was, you had the arrogance of Babylon through the descendants of Nebuchadnezzar. Eventually, through his arrogance, he was conquered by the Medo-Persians, and ultimately, whenever the Medo-Persians came in and they took over, that religious sect went to Pergamos, and they set up camp in Pergamos. And in fact, they named the king of Pergamos at the time the High Emperor of the mystery religions. And they set up colleges and institutions in Pergamos, just like they had practiced in Babylonia. And so ultimately, the pagan gods really didn't change that much. However, there was no worldly ruler. You know what I'm saying? You still prayed to the moon god, you still prayed to the sun god, but they weren't incarnate into these rulers on earth whenever the Persians took over. You know what I'm saying? Correct. All that was sent to Pergamos. So they're the ones that instituted the high priesthood. They went ahead and named I guess there was a king, but it was Pergamos, but would be like a district more than it would be anything. It'd be kind of like Vatican is right now. So ultimately, all the way through, you had, the Persians conquering, and basically they're the ones that rebuilt the Jewish temple and whatnot. This whole time, you have the Jews, what we call the Jews, in captivity for the most part. They took over Israel. They took over the Hebrews. They brought them in. They put them captive. We hear this in the Bible from the story of Nebuchadnezzar. They were there during Persia. You have King Cyrus. He rebuilds the Temple Mount. And a lot of these kings and rulers find favor in God's sight to go ahead and rule over these people and whatnot. And every time, whenever a king gets arrogant, Nebuchadnezzar gets arrogant, guess what happens? He loses his power. He loses his seat. Because that's how God operates. He shows it throughout history with the rise and fall of empires. The more, the closer that an empire gets with God, and abiding by his rules and his laws, just like the United States, the more success is found. The further away it gets, the more dilapidated, the more crime, the more, pain, suffering starts to happen. So you have these people, they go to Pergamos, and it wasn't until, you have the Greeks come in, right? And the Greeks had their own it was the same kind of religion, they had Apollo and Zeus and all these other people, so they still had polytheism going. And this, like I said, when we look at these people, they're all the same people: Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. However, they had this thing called Gnosticism. You know what I'm saying? That's what they called it. So the Gnosticism during this point in time was influencing people like Aristotle. They were influencing people like um, uh, Socrates. They were influencing Gnosticism, heavily influenced, which is the same thing. Gnosticism is the same thing as the mystery Babylonian religion. It's the same stuff. It's basically saying that human can go ahead and we're evolving, which is the same thing that we teach in our institutions today, and we're going to become godlike. It's the same thing. So, this religion was kind of protected through the Persians and through the Greeks, all the way up until the Romans. Well, can you guess what happened whenever with the Romans, Blake?
Tell me, Poston, because again, again, just to clarify, I look at this more of a, I don't, you are far more intelligent and more wise and more knowledgeable about certain things of this. I'm more of a big picture and look at it from a psychological point of view and look at it as kind of a pointer to certain things. So please continue.
So whenever Caesar takes the throne, right? Julius Caesar takes the throne, right? The king of Pergamos, basically the archbishop, I guess you would say, of Pergamos, ended up dying. But whenever he died, he went ahead and dedicated his, seat to that of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar didn't understand what he had at the time. It's like, okay, well, you know what? I get a merit badge. But he didn't realize at the time what he had inherited. But whenever he did, well, guess what Julius Caesar did? Now Julius Caesar is not only king or emperor of Rome, now he's God. And this is where you get that seat of authority coming back from Pergamos, going back to Caesar, right? So basically, the title of being God on earth and emperor at the same time ended up coming back under Rome. And so this is where the mystery religions went ahead, and this is whenever Rome fully started to adopt the practice of Babylonian of being God, of man being God again. And so it's funny because it's always the same thing. You know what I'm saying? It's, first off, it's polytheism. And, you're worshiping the sun, the moon, the stars. You have a god for this. You have a god of the ocean, a god of the air, a god of crops, a god of earth, a god of, you have Poseidon. You have all these gods. And the funny thing is, right, a lot of these planets that we have right now are named after those gods. Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, they're all named after gods. They're not named after, people who discovered them. You know what I'm saying? They're all named after gods. And and whenever you look at what they teach in these institutions with the solar system, basically what the Romans really were is sun worshippers. So the sun is in the center of the fucking solar system. It's a solar system. It's not a Terra system or an Earth system. It's a solar system. So it's, you can kind of see how they intertwine a lot of pagan beliefs into our institutions today. And a lot of that has to do with academia. Whenever you look at philosophy, who are we studying? We're studying Plato. We're studying Socrates. We're studying Aristotle. We're studying a lot of those Greek philosophers who were Gnostic, which also practiced Satanism, pretty much, or Luciferianism. Basically, the thing is that God is man is evolving into a god. That's what they're teaching in these institutions today. And then everybody's like wondering why society is so bad. So I'll go ahead and kick it to you and get your take on it and see what you think.
I, brother, I hate to keep saying this, but like, I think you're gonna have to take the lead on a lot of this because I agree with you, and I really don't know what more to add to it. So, God, I'm so sorry, brother, because I feel like I'm not doing my part in this podcast like I have the last few, because you're like, again, when it comes down to what we're speaking about, you're far ahead of me, man. Like that, this is not my forte as to speak of. I'm learning a lot from you, though. I truly am. And again, as you know, like I have a different take on Lucifer than most people do, including you, and that's something that we disagree about. And I'm very open-minded to change my point of view on that. I'm very cautious with speaking about things that I am, I guess, ignorant about when it comes to this, because you have this stuff down to a T, and again, I'm more of a like kind of a big picture, but I'm agreeing with you. I do believe that that's what they're pushing and preaching. That not only are they trying to get rid of God, but they're promoting that we can become like God. I myself, unfortunately, if you go back to my channel, which will be linked below, I have not deleted it or cleaned it up like I planned on, just because I want people to see my transformation and the phases I went through. And I was one of those people. You can call it new age. I know you say it's not new age because it's actually older, but that it's what quote unquote new age spirituality goes on these days. And the fact that you can go back and watch my videos, and I have made the claim that you could become God, and I've made the claim that I'm ashamed, brother, and we spoke about this on another podcast. I'm ashamed to admit that I took part in that. But yes, I preached the message that you could become God. And I preached the message that we were evolving our consciousness into that of something relatable or on the same level as God. However, that is no longer my point of view. I was completely ignorant. I was brainwashed. I was deep within my own ego. I had taken far too many psychedelics, and I was delusional. So I'm agreeing with you 100% when it comes to the universities and when it comes to this. I do, however, believe that there is good things in philosophy, and I do believe that there's good things with things like that. But we are, do you want me to cuss or not cuss on here, Paulson?
It doesn't matter. Either way, I cuss sometimes.
Okay, because I'm trying really hard not to, because my goal is to become a motivational speaker and incorporate God and Christ or love or whatever you want to say into it through my testimony of life. But I'm trying to clean it up. However, I'm just going to be brutally honest. We are fucked if we do not collectively return back in some way, shape, or form to God, and stop this silly idea and notion that we are God-like or can become like the actual God. And I do believe we're waking up, and I do believe within waking up, it is expanding our consciousness to understand God better. But that absolutely does not mean we're becoming God or anything of that nature. I think we're waking up to our purpose, and I think we're waking up to I'm trying to use my words that way they cannot be misinterpreted.
Got a little worm in here.
I think we're waking up to the fact that we are capable of a lot more than we have been led to believe, especially when it comes to, you take into account things like the placebo effect, things like, I think we're a lot more capable of healing our body, as people want you to believe. I think we're far more capable of healing our minds. And again, that's help with God. I'm not saying that you can do it on your own, but I'm saying with God, I think that brother, I don't want anyone to misinterpret my words. So I'm trying to pick them very carefully because I've used the wrong words in the past. And if I'm getting off topic, just pull me back in the right direction, man. Um, I agree with you. I'm just saying that, like, we're fucked if we all do not come together and realize that we need God in our life, and realize that these universities are pushing nonsense. And if people don't realize, they have to drop their ego enough to admit and accept that they have been brainwashed. They have to drop their ego and armor enough to admit that, like myself, I'm speaking solely for myself, but I know there's a lot of people out there that do the same thing, that have preached this quote unquote new age stuff. And basically this new age stuff is, you are your own God, or you are the creator. And I do think that you can create in your own life with the help of God. I mean, that's free will, but to push that, and again, I'm guilty of it, and I'm truly deeply sorry. Like, in all sense of the words, I became Lucifer, and the Lucifer in the story of the Bible that thought I could be like God, overthrow God, would rather rule on earth than serve in heaven. And I'm truly sorry for that. And it's took me a while to forgive myself from those words, the videos I made. And unfortunately, I led people down the wrong path at times. I am responsible for a few people, um, what I would call going borderline insane and delusional, because they listened to me. And while I didn't have any ill intent behind it, my message has always been love yourself and do unto others, and there's a God. But I was pointing to the fact that that was you, that you're it. And like, brother, I can't express enough how truly sorry I am. There's at least 3 to 5 people, if not more, that I know that I have messed with their minds, and I led them down a dark path. And for that, I can't apologize enough. I'm working on forgiving myself for that, but that's what I'm saying. I've sinned, brother, and I'm repenting, and that's why I'm pushing this message that I am now. And just to go back to the original point, I don't mean to go all over the place, but you are correct. Pretty much everything you said was correct. Now, I do disagree on, this is something we will talk about, obviously, in this video, I'm assuming, is Lucifer. I don't believe Lucifer is Satan or the devil. I know me and you've had the talk. The devil means death and Satan means opposition. But I do not think that, I don't, this is something we'll have to get into when we get into it to explain it better. But I'm just going to end this here and hand it back over to you, because I don't want to keep rambling on or getting off topic. But I agree with you. And also, to anyone that's watching this that has watched any of my videos in the past, or that is new to my channel and went back and watched the old ones, I'm truly sorry if I ever led you down a dark path, because that is the darkest and loneliest path you will ever go down, thinking that you are God and all alone. And words cannot express how sorry I am for that.
Okay, so we'll go on, and so ultimately, the Roman emperors assumed the title of God on earth, essentially, after they were inherited this by the passing away of the king of Pergamos at the time, Attalus, I think his name was. this point in time, somewhere between the Greek philosophy age, you had the Jewish people there. And you have a guy named Philo who, how's it going, Dark Horse? You had a guy named Philo, and he was developing this thing called the Cabal. Now, what Philo thought he could do was take those stories of the Old Testament, right? But what Philo thought he would do is he would go ahead and incorporate those into paganism. So basically, what Philo was doing with the Cabal, which is basically where you get a lot of the modern Jewish, traditional Jewish beliefs. This is where I think that religion became corrupted. It had already been corrupted before they went into Babylon. That's why God sent them into Babylon. That's why God had Babylon come in, is that they were already infested. And I'll tell you a story. And this is like one of my favorite extra biblical stories. So Terran, which was Abraham's father, right, was the chief idol maker for Nimrod at the time. And basically, the stargazers, all these mystics and pagan religions, religious people, right? The hierarchs, basically his council, basically Nimrod's council said, look, King, the stars tell us this story of a coming of a child that's going to be detrimental. He's going to be detrimental to your kingdom, and he's going to be born in the house of Terran. Now, this perplexed Nimrod quite a bit. He didn't want to really go out and kill a baby himself. However, he commissioned Terran. He said, Terran, okay, I'll give you great wealth and riches if you go ahead and kill your kid. So Terran couldn't kill his son. So instead of killing him, he went and sent this child to go live with Noah and Shem in the mountains.
I'm going to have to mute you for a minute, brother. I'm waiting on a call that someone's calling me. It'll just be 5 minutes.
Okay.
So sorry, man.
So anyways, with that being said, he sends Abraham to go live. And Abraham, at this point in time, was being raised by Noah, who was, of course, found favor with God during the flood, and Shem. He was basically raised up. Well, ultimately, what happened is you have all these pagan idols that were built, as gods, as tributes to that the Babylonians would make sacrifice to. And so, ultimately, whenever Abraham grows up, he decides he wants to go ahead and challenge his father's beliefs. So he goes back to Babylon. He, brings a lamb with him, and he sees that there's these 10 idols. Well, he decides he's going to go ahead and offer up a sacrifice to these idols. But instead of just offering up the sacrifice, he takes an axe and then he destroys 9 of the idols, saving just one idol. So ultimately, this infuriated all the high priests of Babylon at the time. And they gather in council and they go down, they get Nimrod. And Nimrod looks at Abraham and he says, what have you done? You've destroyed all of these idols. You've destroyed all of these idols. And Abraham says, okay, here's what happened. I brought my lamb down here to offer as a sacrifice to the gods. Well, what happened was, whenever I made that sacrifice, all the little gods started to jump at the lamb. Well, the bigger god just started massacring all the other gods and took the lamb for himself. And of course, this pissed off Nimrod. Nimrod goes, do you really expect me to believe that your story of this, these wooden idols going around and this wooden idol killed all the other idols? He goes, Your Majesty, you sit here and tell me that these 10 wooden idols created all the heavens and all of the earth, yet you don't believe this story I just told you, this little bit of a story? And so that's an extra biblical representation of basically what they were teaching in Babylon. And whenever Nimrod and Semiramis, at this point in time, Semiramis, Nimrod's wife, she is like the high priestess of all these mystery religions, basically converting. Whenever you're looking at Mary and Jesus, that's not Mary and Jesus. That's the Madonna and Child. That's what that is. All of these saints were essentially Babylonian gods at one point in time. And so this is what kind of got incorporated into our, current Christian religion through the guise of Catholicism. So with that being said, now that we've wrapped up that story, we can kind of see how they were worshiping false idols. This is why whenever the Bible says you shall have no other idol, don't worship any of these false idols, that's exactly what it's referring to, is these false idols that were being worshipped, whether it be Marduk, whether it be Moloch, which is the same god, whether it be Baal. All of these gods were essentially the same gods. They were the same rulers of Babylon. So during this time, we have the Jews going ahead. They're trying to paganize Judaism, their traditional Hebrew beliefs from scriptures. They create this thing called the Cabal to go ahead and lay over the pagan beliefs, the mystery religions. That's what the Cabal was going to do. On the other side of it, what ended up happening is you had Jesus Christ. During that span of the Roman Empire and what would essentially become the Holy Roman Empire, Jesus comes to earth, basically to go ahead and spread the gospel. And basically, he come to fulfill all of the prophecies from Moses to Daniel, from Adam to all the way up until Elijah. He was there to fulfill all of those prophecies and to go ahead and put his life on the line, to sacrifice, because that's the only difference. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you. Christianity is the one that says that we're not perfect, and we're not perfect. We all have shortcomings. You just heard it from Blake where he fell into that trap where he was going to be perfected coming into God. None of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. But Christianity is the only one that says this out loud. It says the quiet part out loud, that we're not going to be, we don't have the ability to become gods. Even if the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. So, during this time, you have the Hebrew religion, the Old Testament religion, being corrupted by the Cabal, by the Jewish synagogues at the time, even before, whenever Jesus was around, it was being corrupted. I'm going to go and let, oh, fuck. Okay. So, anyways, you have it being corrupted. The Old Testament's being corrupted through the Cabal by a guy named Philo. On the opposite end, you have Christianity starting up. Jesus is confronting these people at the synagogues. They were using usury. They were, really corrupting the religion. They were trying to hold to that Old Testament, but they were just having a hard time. Jesus come back to go ahead to constitute himself, to give himself for a sacrifice, for that way everybody could have salvation, essentially. At this point in time, the Jews rejected Jesus. And like I said, whenever you go back and you look at it, you have the stoning of Stephen. That was pretty much the last time. And like I said, you had a lot of Jews at this point in time. They fled to the mountains because they already understood what was coming. But that was whenever the Jews really rejected Christ, was with the stoning of Stephen. This is also, you get a lot of these dispensationalists that are like, oh yeah, the Antichrist has to come back and we have to start animal sacrifices. We have to build the temple again. No, we don't. Because that prophecy comes from the book of Daniel, and that prophecy was fulfilled with the stoning of Stephen. So while you're having the Hebrew text, the Old Testament, being corrupted by the current cabal that the Jewish people were, and a lot of these Jews at this point in time, and due to David's first sin with Bathsheba and stuff, God told David that, hey, the sword of the Ammonites are not is will always be in your house. And this is where we see the Star of Moloch, which they still have on their flag today. So what you're looking at is the Ammonites that are right now currently in Israel. And they're going to pay a heavy price as well, because when you look at the Whore of Babylon in the Revelations and stuff, it tells you exactly probably what the fate of Israel is really going to be at some point in time. Because whenever you look at Israel, God always calls Israel his bride, and Israel was going through Babylon, it went through Persia, it went through Greek, and so it was there with them pagan religions. And so that's the only qualifying is the current Jewish community, is the only current community that would qualify as the Whore of Babylon. I know a lot of people say it's the Catholic Church. God was never married to the Catholic Church. You know what I'm saying? But with that being said, and that's just, scriptures getting into that. So whenever the Roman Empire fell, you had the king, the emperor ruling from Rome, and then you had the bishop ruling from Constantinople. We had that divide right there. And essentially what ended up happening was the Roman Empire fell. And ultimately, you had guys like Constantine that supposedly converted to Christianity, but he was still considered, to a degree, a god and an emperor. And basically, I think that it was only suspended for 2 years under the Rome until Damascus took it up. And today you call that emperor, you call that God on earth, basically. The priest of the mystery religions is called the Pope. He still holds that title. It originated from Babylon. So you have this title coming up through the Holy Roman Empire, which lasts 1,260 years, as it says, in the Bible, that the Antichrist would rule for time dividing the time. 1,260 days is 1,260 years. And then you have this age called the Enlightenment. Now, I've already went through Gnosticism in the Greek, which is where a lot of your, pagan orthodoxy was being kept during the Greek, whenever the Grecian Empire ruled the world, basically. The Gnostics were teaching mystery religions, and then you still had the emperor of the mysteries ruling from Pergamos at that point in time. You have this period called, you have the Holy Roman Empire, that falls. You have the Enlightened Pyramid. It was basically, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start this new age of not having any God whatsoever. No God. That was their goal, was to abolish God. And in fact, if you go back and you read the French Revolution, they were renaming months to various names. They were doing 10-day weeks where they didn't have a Sabbath at all, where you couldn't celebrate a Sabbath. They tried to change the times and laws. And ultimately, they, were going to base their society off of philosophy. And philosophy is very, very evident today. But whose philosophy was it? It was the Gnostics back in Greece. The same ones that was teaching Luciferianism. And mind you, that Luciferianism, Lucifer, regardless, is the deity. It's the mindset. It was when man decided he could become God, and that he would assume God's authority. This is what it says in the Bible. People will sit there and say, well, the Lucifer was a good guy. He was trying to free man. He was trying to give man knowledge. He was trying to go ahead and give man the ability to be God, but you cannot be God. There's just no way that man could ever be God on his own. God can, chisel away and make you like him. We strive to be like him, but there's no way that as a single man, one would become God. But that's ultimately what we see time and time again. We see that in dictators today. Kim Jong-un, Fidel Castro. They try to take on this persona of being like God. And, we can still see in the world today the degradation that comes along with this. There's still, like I said, we have to accept these people. Oh, and then they try to play to Christianity. Everybody has an opinion of what Christianity should be, except for fucking Christians. Do you know what I'm saying? You can't sit there and be judgmental. You can't sit there and say that, so we're supposed to sit here and let you ruin society and let you go ahead and attack our kids and whatnot with your, either dispensationalist beliefs in the fucking church, your 501c3s. You really can't practice. You really can't preach certain sermons. It's supposed to build you up. It's supposed to build community. We're supposed to be getting along together, but we're getting further apart. And this ultimately has a lot to do with Satan's influence, with Lucifer's influence on society. There's no way that a society based on Luciferianism, based on Satanism, based on atheism, it doesn't matter whatever you want to call it, because they're all the same thing. There's no way that a society could ever prosper under that ideology, which is what it is, assuming that everybody were to become gods. We see this happen time and time again. We've seen this happen in Babylonia. Whenever the gods were becoming more human-like in Babylon. They would turn on each other. They would network against each other. And this is kind of what we're seeing in today's society. So the more we take away God out of society, the worse that it becomes for society. No wonder that your kids are coming out gender confused. No wonder your people are coming out more violent, aggressive. You have a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. You have a lot of anger and a lot of emotions in everybody's aspects. You have the mainstream media creating fake bullshit stories that people will go ahead, they'll rap on, and they'll get so invested into it, that they're not looking at the bigger picture. You know what I'm saying? Which, would be people would be a lot better if they would try to sit down, just pray. Try to pray for understanding. Try to pray for understanding of the Bible. The text, some of the stories are going to be a little bit, because you have a lot of different people putting in. And like I said, it's God's relationship with man. It's written by man about God's relationship with man. It's not God writing about his relationship with man. So you're going to get a lot of different personalities, and so it gets a little bit confusing. However, the sheer fact is that there is probably 1,875 prophecies that came out of this book. You go back and look at the scientific foreknowledge in the book, it's pretty spot on. We're already starting to discover a lot of archaeology, the archaeology of the Bible, and it's being exposed as being pretty fucking spot on into where everything is. So, in a sense, that Satan has basically controlled, and he's still controlling society. What do you have today? You have people sitting there saying that we need to go ahead and go to war with Ukraine. And then, we need to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. And then we have to go to war with Iran over Israel. And they're sitting there manipulating everybody. And everybody has to get emotionally invested. Everybody has to see themselves as the heroes. Nobody ever starts to sit there and think just for a moment that, one of those cities that they're talking about bombing, there may be a guy that would probably identify and, understand and, be a pretty good friend to you. And you would probably get along with better than the motherfuckers in the government who wants to go ahead and bomb this guy. You know what I'm saying? Could be your brother or your sister over there that they're talking about bombing. And they could be talking about bombing us right now. So what do we get out of fighting these useless wars for these motherfuckers? What do we get for getting involved in all these, outrageous BLM protest and all this shit? All you get is your fucking stores burnt down. All you get is higher taxes. We look at government right now, and we look at the job that these people are doing. And you look at the inflation whenever you go to the store and you're having to buy a thing of eggs. And you have to sit there and wonder, why are these people in charge? So, I mean, there's still heavy. If you think that, Satan is just a myth, Lucifer is just a myth. First off, Satan is the adversary. Satan is definitely not a myth. The devil, you die, so the devil is death. That's not a myth. Lucifer is still out there. The mindset's still out there. The influence is still out there. And then as soon as you motherfuckers stop going around trying to assume so much control, trying to assume so much authority through these networks that you have right here in your institutions, whenever you stop trying to assume so much authority over people's lives and whatnot, then we'll sit there and have a discussion of whether Satan exists or Lucifer exists or not. But the sheer fact is that he's still clearly here in society. They're still going out there making up, rules and laws that are not in your best interest. They have you going around thinking that there's an invasion at the border. Is there an invasion at the border? I don't really think so. I don't believe it. I think it's mainly them lying. And if I could sit there and watch a mainstream media story without them, totally manufacturing a placebo or whatnot to try and get people invested in, because their networks are failing, because they've lied so many times, one after another. This is why I don't cover a lot of the stuff anymore like I used to. I used to sit there, and if something happened with Vince McMahon, I would be covering it right now. But I don't. I come at it with a degree of skepticism, because I've seen this story with Bill Cosby. I've seen this story with Kobe Bryant. I've seen this story with Deshaun Watson, with Ben Roethlisberger. I've seen this story with Donald Trump. We've seen this story come out time and time again. So it seems to be the only thing that they're really good at right now, our leadership, the people, the Luciferians that are in charge running this place, is dividing everybody, creating chaos and thinking that they're going to build up something better to put back in its place. And that's always the way it's been ever since Babylon, ever since Persia, ever since Greek. They go ahead, they collapse the system, and then they build something up, and the exact same thing happens. The sheer fact is that no, these people can never build anything. They can't build a world empire. The only one that's going to be able to come in and save the world, it's not going to be the Republicans. It's not going to be the Democrats. The only one that's going to be able to come in and do anything of, any meaning and actually save this planet as we know it and save the world, it's going to be Jesus. It's not going to be the fucking Republicans or Democrats. It's not going to be Donald Trump, or it's not going to be fucking Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton. And, the sheer fact of sitting here giving these fucking Democrats and giving these Republicans the time of day, it's kind of a waste of my time. And so, I figure, going through these things right here, putting up these videos, I put them out. They're up here for posterity purposes, pretty much. We understand that basically it was Cain. Cain was the first one to, Lucifer at the beginning, at the Garden of Eden, as far as it pertains to the Bible, the stories that were passed down, I'm going to hold them a little bit more legitimate. Lucifer was the one that went ahead and convinced Adam and Eve to go ahead and eat from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. They had two sons. Cain killed Abel. Cain was banished from the garden, basically. Fits every profile of Satan. So, like I said, basically Earth is like a shadow of heaven. And so whenever Cain was banished, he started to build these cities. He started to build these empires. He, ultimately created civilization. Civilization got wicked. God destroyed the earth, restarted with one man and 8 of his relatives. Ultimately, the sin continued with Ham going ahead, passing it down through his lineage, through Canaan. You get Nimrod, you get Egypt, you get a lot of these people that would build up empires just like their father did. And so those empires ended up influencing later empires, which, Babylon would be the chief architect of where God would assume the authority of God here on earth through Nimrod, and ultimately through the sun god worship. This is where all of the power and authority of Babylon came from. Like I said, the emperors were worshipped as not just emperors, but they were worshipped as God, as the high priest of their religion. And ultimately, that ended whenever Persia came in. When Persia came in, they killed off the ultimately high priest at that point in time, which was Belteshazzar. And then ultimately that throne moved to Pergamos. You know, you had the Greece over here, you had the Persians and the Greeks still practicing the same religions, but they didn't have a high priest because they were developing their own little mystery religions. And those religions were passed down into your institutions today, what you call a pessimistic relativism. This is what they teach in these institutions. They teach Plato, they teach Socrates, they teach. And I know that some people like Blake will sit there and say, oh, yeah, philosophy is good, but it's all kind of derived from Luciferianism. Like I said, the mystery religions portray Lucifer as the savior. They inverted those stories. They inverted Cain as being unjustly banished, because of his arrogance. But that's exactly why Cain was banished from the get-go. And whenever we look at this, right, that ended up becoming, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire ended up becoming the Enlightenment. And then you get the quote unquote trust the science community that's still practicing the same thing. But like I said, these are all still based on those mystery religions from Babylon. And, ultimately nothing has changed. And if you're sitting there thinking that somehow we can go ahead and practice this and that we're going to all come together right now, like they're all telling you, and that we're going to somehow ascend, that's what they've been teaching ever since Babylon. And it's never worked. It's never worked. So, ultimately, having a personal relationship with God is going to prove to be much more beneficial in your life, to be honest with you. And you're never going to find anything. I mean, you can have, like I said, all the sex, drugs, rock and roll that you want to, but you're never going to be able to fill that void. You get these addictions and whatnot where you're totally addicted to these things and whatnot. Whatever it is, you're totally addicted to it. And it's never going to fill that void. You got to have a personal relationship with God. And I don't think that the world is ever going to, become, a paradise until we have a personal relationship with our Creator. And, like I said, the relationship that the Creator is going to have with you is going to be totally different than the relationship that the Creator has with me. My relationship with the Creator is going to be totally different than the one that Blake had with the Creator. Dark Horse's relationship with the Creator is going to be totally different than mine. And we're all going to bring something to the table, and it's not going to be the same thing. Because if we all brought bread pudding to a damn, a family get-together or whatnot, then it would be a pretty bland fucking family Thanksgiving if we're all having to eat bread pudding and that's it. But, the sheer thing is that somebody's going to bring the turkey. Somebody's going to end up bringing the coleslaw. Somebody's going to end up bringing the dressing. Somebody's going to end up. So we all contribute different aspects. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. It looked like Blake went ahead and took off on me. You people, tell me what you think. What's your relationship? Do you see Satan's fingerprints right now in society? Like I said, I see so many people willy-nilly ready to roll out to the fucking border like fucking Byron the fucking Great and shit, going out there and taking up arms to the border. I see people getting involved with the Israel-Palestinian thing. I see people getting so much. But if you turn the shit off, then that wouldn't have an influence on your life. You would find out very fucking quickly that these little cartoons that they put out there right now and try to reel you in on would probably have a lot less influence on your life. So you people tell me what you think. You like, sub, follow, friend, do the shit the internet tells me to do to get over. And for now, I'm out.